Let's get this party started.
Okay, everyone here, now it's time for the next subject to take place on Trappan-scenen. And I'm standing here with my friend Irina. Why can't I... and your last name?
Wilder.
Yeah, Irina Wilder. You are going to have a lecture for us
Yeah.
about queering AI.
Yep.
I'm very interested in
Yay.
this topic. It sounds very interesting. Please take it away or welcome everyone who is here.
Who is still not leaving? Yes. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for staying and thank you for being interested in AI, artificial intelligence. What's going to happen is for the next 45 minutes, I will explain what AI is and is not. And also, why should we care about AI? How does that affect everybody, not only queer users, but queer users in particular? I will give you some reflection time. I will ask you to maybe take a few minutes here and there to reflect upon your own experiences and what I'm saying and how it concerns you. And then if you have any questions, we will try to leave time in the end and answer them. Before we start, let me explain what AI is and is not, because if I say artificial intelligence and you imagine the Matrix or the Terminator, then we are not on the same page. I mean, sentient machines are cool, but they don't exist and are not going to exist, at least in our lifetime. What AI is, in reality, in practice, is a bunch of very, very complex statistical models, mathematical models that analyze a vast universe of data, enormous amount of data, and try to find patterns in that randomness. How is one thing is like the other? And simply put, they are intelligent because they use human logic, right? They try to think or reason in the same way humans learn about the world. Since we're babies, we learn the meaning of words or the meaning of objects by searching for patterns, right? A baby does not know what a cat is until somebody points out and says, this animal is a cat. And then in real life, this is a cat. In the movies, it's a cat. In the pictures and so on. And then at some point, a baby is able to recognize that this is a cat when it sees the next one. In the same way, we recognize patterns and can predict the future. So if you know that fire is dangerous, then you can't predict what's going to happen if you touch a hot stove, right? So AI, the current applications of AI, are intelligence just in the same way. They look at the past data, the historical data, look for patterns, and then try to extrapolate those patterns to analyze the present and predict the future. What most people don't realize so far is that AI is not in some distant future, is not sci-fi. It's already here, it's already in our everyday lives, and we are interacting with AI all the time. I can safely assume that all of us, or most of us here, have a smartphone, right? That little machine, regardless of your model, on average has about 200 different applications, AI applications, either as part of its operating system or as the core functionality of the apps that you have installed. And that is on average, but that number is only going to increase. It's not going to get lower. So what are those applications? Where do we interact with AI? By far, the most common applications are all sorts of recommendation systems and ranking systems. Any streaming services for movies, for games, for music, any shopping sites. Every time you see, hey, we think you might like this thing, that is an AI running in the background and analyzing your past behavior and kind of trying to predict what it thinks you might like. The combination of ranking and recommendation system is also the core functionality of all social networks, from YouTube and TikTok to Instagram and Facebook and any social network in existence, and also Google search. And these combinations, these algorithms, are the reasons why each of us has its own version, our own version of the internet, right? My internet is not like any one of yours. We have our little bubbles based on the recommendations that we get from these algorithms. And then image processing algorithms that can do facial recognition and biometric scanning, and also can enhance your selfies and make it look like a Picasso. And then natural language processing. You can talk to Siri and Alexa and Google Assistant, or you can talk to Google Translate, and it will translate everything you say into another language. That's magic. And then a bunch of other algorithms, and I'm only talking about customer applications that we, again, interact with every day. I'm not talking about industry applications, because there is 1,000 of them, even more. Now, if we are already interacting with AI all the time, what do we need to know in case it might get dangerous and want to conquer the world or something? Let me give you two specific truths, fundamental truths that apply to all AI algorithms, and give you a visual example for each of them. The example number one, imagine that we are building a self-driving car, right? And the main challenge for that car is to recognize what's going on in its environment. It needs to know if it sees another car or if it sees a tree. And the more that car is looking at different pictures of trees, there is an image recognition algorithm running, or several of them running in the background. And it recognizes the simple fact that most of us actually know, and it's that the trees are green, right? And the algorithm starts recognizing that a blob of green somewhere here is probably a tree. And it becomes super fast, super effective, very, very nice, very beautiful algorithm, until the autumn arrives, and you actually realize that trees in a temperate climate are only green like 4 months out of 12. And the rest of the year they're anything but, because then the winter arrives, as it does, and your algorithm is looking at these 50 shades of gray and goes, eh. And it's a ridiculous example, I agree, but that is exactly what happened with the facial recognition softwares or algorithms. There is several of them, and all of them use different methods and different algorithms, but all of them had the same problem. They were mainly trained on the data, on the images of people who were predominantly white and predominantly male. So they were super good at recognizing white men, the faces of white men, but they were not super good at recognizing anybody else, to the point where there is a documentary called Coded Bias, where a data scientist, Dr. Joy Bolamvini, who also happens to be a black woman, could not make those algorithms to recognize her face until she put on a white paper mask. And it's ridiculous, offensive, and racist, and it's just the problem with the data that those algorithms have been trained on. So the fundamental truth that we all need to remember about any AI applications is this: the algorithm or the model is only as good as the data. If the data are crap or incomplete or skewed, the model will be crap as well. It's as simple as that. And the only solution for this problem, for this truth, is to make sure that the data that we use correctly represent the complexity of the whole world. And it's difficult, even with trees, but it's even more difficult when it comes to invisible characteristics such as gender and sexuality. Let me give you a second example. This is a form, right, that all of us have filled in many, many times in our lives. And I'm going to keep filling forms like that every time you do travel booking or registration for any events or job applications. They want to ask you personal details. And when they want to know your personal details, they ask you about your gender. And they ask you to select out of the pre-suggested options, right, They might ask you explicitly, they might ask you about your title. If you're a mister, they know that you're a man, no choice there. Or they might try and guess your gender based on your name or your email. Now, I want you to think for a moment what's happening when the data like this are getting accumulated. What is the result of people, many people filling in this form? First of all, gender in this form is binary and immutable, right? Non-binary users don't exist. Queer fluid, gender fluid, and gender non-conforming don't exist. Trans people don't exist. You cannot change the result of this form afterwards. And when the algorithms are trained later on this data, what happens is they try and promote the historical patterns, and most of those patterns are sexist or homophobic or transphobic, because those are the data that we have collected, and those are the systems that have built the forms that we are filling in. We want to think that AI is unbiased because it's a machine. It does not have emotions or prejudices. But the truth is that AI cannot have imagination, cannot imagine what does not exist in the data. It cannot just get out of its little box and go shopping for data somewhere else. What it can do is only recognize the patterns that are already there. So if Amazon has had, hopefully not now, but has had in the past a pattern of hiring more men than women, then the algorithm will recognize that pattern and will think that being a man is a better qualifier for a job than education or experience. And those are the patterns that exist in all human data because of the way we have collected those data historically. So one thing that we need to realize is that by default, because of the way we have collected the data, by default, all AI applications running on human data are just as conservative, patriarchal, homophobic, transphobic, racist, ableist as your least favorite relative. Right? There is no escape out of there. That is by default. If we want to change that default, we need to think about how we collect the data and what we do with those models. Now it's a reflection time. What I would like you to do is to turn to a person next to you, smile and say hi, basically show that you're not a robot. And then I would like you to reflect. Sorry? Okay. No. Just try to think about these two questions very quickly. I'll give you like a minute and a half. Where do you come across AI in your daily life? How do you interact with AI? And when do you share your personal data, and how those data could be collected, you think? Let's take that moment and just reflect on it. Yeah, go for it. It's a reflection time. I promised you a workshop, so yeah, use the opportunity to reflect. Mm-hmm. Cool. I would want to know what you're discussing, but later on, when we have probably, hopefully, some time for questions and reflections. Now, to the topic of today, where does AI come across queer users and what happens when the algorithms that are by default not very good affect the lives of the queer community or LGBTQIA plus community. Now, there are many different applications, and I wanted to, but I'm not gonna include all the things that can go wrong, because there are quite a few, but I'm not in the business of the trauma porn, right? We are not going to recount all the situations where queer people could be discriminated against, now also by AI, not only by humans. But I want you to imagine that all aspects of human life, starting from privacy and safety and ending with health and employment and censorship, all of that is now, all of those areas are now affected by AI, and queer users are targeted in a disproportional way. Let me give you two examples. One is about bodies and another one is about voices. When it comes to bodies, the main target by the incomplete or ineffective or biased AI algorithms are the trans people. When it comes to all the health apps or smart watches, smart weights or scales that try to measure your health parameters and then suggest your best health regime, most of those suggestions are gendered and not in a good way, because for them, non-binary or trans people don't exist. So for them, again, all the medical suggestions or recommendations usually come with "you're abnormal, you're not what we expect you to be, we need you to change." They are discriminatory and usually very offensive. But that is not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that when airport security firms started using AI for body scanning, you know, when you go through the security check and there is a metal thing and it scans your body, it expects you to be of a certain gender. And if you don't conform, like your visual presentation does not correspond with what the security officer sees on their screen, you're a threat, apparently, simply because you're abnormal in the airport context. And it has been happening so much during the 2000s, the early 2000s, that the National Center for the Transgender Equality even issued a manual how to fly while being trans, because that harassment has been happening over and over again. And we need to put legal protections and we need to educate people. So how do we do that? When it comes to voices, and again, I'm summarizing everything and it's a bunch of different experiences, but when it comes to recommendation systems, right, what are they going to recommend? What is popular or normal in the normal as in heteronormative, right? So queer creators on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or whatever social network of your choice or your interest, queer books, queer movies on any streaming service, they're not promoted, and sometimes they're banned for being apparently offensive or a threat, simply because they don't conform to the norm. Algorithms are trained on the data that are heteronormative, that presume that there is no erotic context, there is no explicit context. If you're doing that, oh my God, you're showing boobs, you must be a sex worker, we are gonna ban you. And that is happening because the algorithms are simply not aware of other patterns. They are replicating the patterns that already exist, and it's happening on a larger and larger scale because the data are not updated. Another reflection time. Can you think of situations where you witnessed, maybe you've seen in the newspapers, or maybe you participated in a situation where AI has been discriminatory against somebody? And what did people do in that situation? Again, I invite you to to share. You can reflect on it on your own, but it's important to share this, and I will explain why in just a moment. I'll give you 2.5 minutes for this one. Okay. Now, I think I did not scare you enough, or maybe some people already know what I'm talking about, and other people are like, yeah, that's the world. What did you expect? Well, I expect a better world at some point in the future. Again, there are ways of teaching AI and actually teaching AI algorithms faster than we can teach people how to be more inclusive, how to be queer friendly. And that's because, again, AI is recognizing patterns. And if it can recognize patterns that are inclusive, that are promoting non-binary users or trans people, that are promoting anybody from the LGBTQ world, they will, yeah, this is a pattern, I'm going to amplify that. And that is like the work that we also need to do regarding racism and ableism and all other forms of discrimination and oppression. But today we're talking about queer. So I'm going to share 6 different things that you personally, each of you, could do to help AI to be more queer friendly. And the first one is to improve the data. That is the reason I ask you to think, when do you share your data? Because we do that all the time, and all of that data is getting accumulated and analyzed. When do you share your personal data? What happens? Do you input your gender as it is? Do you notice when there are only 2 binary genders? What do you do when you notice that? Can you email that company and say, hey, I think your form is very much not inclusive? Can you, if they offer you an option to not reveal your gender, can you choose that option if you think, even if you think that you're cisgender? What happens is we need to improve the data, and the only way to improve the data is to actually start collecting that data. Now, I'm not asking you to sacrifice your privacy, so be mindful of what you're sharing and how. But next time you come across a form that is asking you about your personal data, I want you to pause before clicking submit and think very carefully about who is collecting your data, how, and how they're going to use it. The second strategy is learn about AI. This is a teaser. Like today I'm giving you something. I'm inviting you to start learning about it, but I'm not going to teach you everything in 45 minutes. That's not realistic. What you can do is try to learn about what AI is, how it works, and when does it affect your life. And you need to do that even if you're not queer and you think you're not affected. Everybody is affected, and AI is only becoming increasingly more and more part of our lives. So you can start with the documentary that I've already mentioned called Coded Bias. You can check out other organizations working on the fairness in AI and working on removing discriminatory practices and discriminatory data. Again, such as racist data, but also anti-LGBTQA+ data. You can create. And this is very important, especially if you have a social network account, but it applies to all forms of creativity. We need more creative queer work. And it applies to movies, books, songs, I don't know, pictures, do something, I don't care. What we need is, again, shift the heteronormative patterns into a more inclusive, like, yeah, queer people are already here and they're already doing something, so please include them into the norm. They need to be part of the overall creative body of work. Why? Because the algorithms, particularly those that work on natural language processing and image recognition and so on, they are trained on the body of work of heteronormative artists, right? They are trained on the texts, classical texts that never mention gay or lesbian or trans. What is that? We need to include those works to make sure that they actually represent queer people. And when you do that, make sure that you write happy queer stories. Make sure that queers are not a threat or a gender because or danger because they are not in real life. They are normal. So write happy queer stories, happy queer songs. Make sure that we actually come across as, you know, as we are in real life. And I can also recommend this project. It's called Queer AI. And it's a chatbot that has been trained on erotic fan fiction, queer fan fiction, gay and lesbian fan fiction. And it's amazing what a chatbot can do when you train them on that fan fiction. You can discuss intergenerational trauma with it. Yeah, go check it out. It's amazing. Did I skip something? No. Number 4 is related to creating, and that is a way to normalize, again, queer works of art, queer creators on the social networks. If you see a book list for the best queer books, how about making sure that they are also included in the list of best books, right? Or if you are following influencers on Instagram, do you remember that the best influencers are not only cisgender, white, and heteronormative? Read queer books, watch queer movies. It's all about who you're following, but also who you're not following and why. Maybe we need to reflect on that. And this is again about teaching the algorithms that bubbles, as they are right now, don't make any sense. Because what's happening right now is that queer users are following other queer users, and this is amplified in the recommendations and the rankings. What we need, in fact, is queer users being followed by non-queer people and vice versa. So there is that normalization of we are not separate bubbles, we are all part of the same beautiful world. Strategy number 5 is, while you're learning about AI, you might as well learn about the legal aspects of it, what the politicians and the regulatory bodies are doing to regulate these practices to actually make sure that the AI is not as racist as it is right now, or homophobic. You can sign petitions, there is a bunch of them. I'm not going to give links because it's going to get a little difficult, but there are petitions demanding transparency from all social networks, demanding transparency in how the algorithms operate and which decision-making processes are going into them, which kind of data are used to train those algorithms. How can we make sure that there is a human in the loop, which means there is human oversight for any decision-making for each of those algorithms? Learn more about GDPR. If you haven't already, if you don't know the privacy of your own human data, you better do that very, very urgently, because those data are going to be increasingly more and more important. And also learn about other legal acts in the European digital sphere. One of them, the upcoming regulation, is called the AI Act. It's not there yet, so it's not a law, but it's going to be introduced next year or maybe in 2 years. It's better if you start learning about it right now while we can influence it. And then number 6, I want you to become a data scientist. Hopefully, if you're interested in data and AI, I'm assuming you are because you're here, but we need representation, right? Things like data sets consisting only of white people happen only because there are no people of color on those data science teams, right? The same with queer. If we need representation in the models and in the data, we better make sure that those data scientists know what they're talking about, know about the LGBTQIA+ community. If you don't want to be a data scientist because you're already happy with your career choices, at least befriend one and talk to them about queer AI. And this is the way we can create, hopefully, at some point in the future, a better and more inclusive world. Now, this is the last moment when I would like to invite you to reflect and share. And this is, again, the moment where I would open up the floor to sharing, with me, if you would like to raise your hand and share something. And these are the questions that I have. Where do you think this affects you? And how do you think you, each one of you, can apply those strategies? And if you need any help, who can you get that help from? And maybe if you can help somebody, how you can help that. Because the point that I'm trying to make by asking you to talk to each other or asking you to talk to me and raise a voice in this auditorium. If you're alone, if you're an individual, you're just one data point in a vast, vast universe, and your voice is going to get lost and your data are going to be average and so on. But if we are, as a community, if we intentionally work on creating a better world by creating better patterns, more inclusive patterns than what we have right now, then the power of the community is what will actually move us toward that better world that only humans, not AI, can imagine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irina, so very much for this. We didn't plan for any questions, but now we have some time left, so I'm just
Fantastic.
improvising. Does anyone here have a question for Irina?
Or just reflections. You can just, go for it.
Yeah. Wait, you're gonna have a mic.
So I think a big issue is the transparency of certain algorithms. They're not very transparent or not at all because black boxes. Is there any way you can increase the transparency so you can find out when it's being homophobic, for example?
Yeah. Yes, so again, since I've suggested to, and this is super loud, what happened? Since I've suggested you to get legal, that is one way of organizing the community by signing petitions. Because Instagram or YouTube, Google, Alphabet, any of those corporations are not going to, willingly say, yeah, we are going to reveal how our models work or reveal how our data are collected or analyzed. And they're trying to, because bad publicity is very bad for their reputation. But to put pressure on them to be more transparent, we need to organize and we need to sign those petitions and we need to get legal in that. The AI Act hopefully will be a step forward, but it's a slow process because it's all regulations. So hopefully we'll get there at some point.
Any more hands?
Yay.
Yeah.
Hey.
Hey.
In case as what we start that you should, if I choose or like Mr. with a woman or opposite, it's gonna be easy for this AI algorithm to train it or to teaching it, or it's better if from scratch, like sending a mail for AI support to put a new like trans or gay or lesbian, it's better, or do you think can human train this AI algorithm to choose another choices?
I'm not sure I understand what would the human...
Like if I put, let's say, Mr. with a woman, okay, or Miss with a man.
Okay, you mean if the choices don't correspond?
Yes, it's gonna be error for the full application, right? How could the AI algorithm fix this, or can the algorithm fix it, or it's better from the scratch? I send an email for the AI support to fix it. What do you think? This point?
Okay, if there is a discrepancy in the data, probably you will be either an outlier, so the AI is going to ignore it completely, or there might be a preferential feature. So if there is an explicit choice for gender, then the AI is going to look at that feature and not at the title, for instance, or not at the implicit gender. Sending emails and asking very politely why that form is not more inclusive and why that form does not offer more options for gender is better, because it opens opportunity not only for you but also for other users, and it also corrects the way we collect the data, right, rather than creating a discrepancy right here and now. And also, I would never invite you to input the data that may be wrong in your definition of wrong. So if I would invite you to choose non-binary gender or gender fluid, or refuse to reveal your gender if there is such an option, even if you are cisgender. Because that is, again, inflating the proportion, but that is just shifting the pattern that is transphobic right now. But again, just be very mindful about your own privacy and your own safety. If you imputing those data would result in you losing a job application or getting refused for boarding a plane because your presented gender does not conform to what you filled in on the form, then I'm not going to take that responsibility, right? Be mindful of what you're doing with your choices. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, how could I like make balancing between giving this data, also like to protect my privacy?
$1 million question. Here is the thing. We often don't realize how much data is already being collected constantly. Do you browse the internet and you come across a cookie notification? And we collect cookies. And you, yes, I agree, I don't bother, and because it happens on every single website. What really happens is that Facebook, Google, other huge corporations are now able to track your activity across the internet, right? Because third-party cookies are getting shared across many different corporations. And what happens is you are basically sharing all of your activity and all of your data, even with the organizations that you did not intend to, right? So learn about data privacy, learn about GDPR, and learn to refuse third-party cookies by default. It's more hassle, I know, but protect your privacy first, because so far nobody would care about your privacy if you don't. And then, yes, the choices of making better data come after privacy, because your own privacy and your own safety come first. Does that answer the question? Yeah, cool. Do we have any online questions, maybe in the chat? No, cool.
No, but thank you very much, Irina. It's been a
joy.
pleasure.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been a joy, really. And if you who watch this at home from your computers have a question later on, you have promised us to answer them online.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much. A round of applause. Och så passar jag på att highlighta lite inför imorgon då det kommer bli mer politikerdebatter här på trappscenen. Och vi håller på ända fram till fredag då vi också kommer ha litterär salong under regnbågen med ingen mindre än prästen Lars Gårdfält. Så kom jättegärna tillbaka hit till trappscenen. Följ oss jättegärna imorgon igen från våran livestream. Så ses och hörs vi helt enkelt. Tack för idag.